What's going on, baseball fans? How are we doing? So we've had all these qualifying offers being offered to players, and it's gotten me to thinking which players in the past have been offered contracts, but they decided to bet on themselves when they should have just accepted the contract. Let's go talk about it. Starting off my list at number 10, I have Matt Harrington. Man, oh man, this is not a fun story to talk about. Matt Harrington got drafted 7th overall by the Colorado Rockies in the 2000 MLB draft. He wanted close to $5 million for a signing bonus, but the Rockies were only offering $4 million. There was a lot of words going back and forth. Matt Harrington's camp was saying that the Rockies had agreed to give him $5 million, but the Rockies were denying that. In the end, their final offer was $4 million. He turned it down, ended up going back into the draft the next year, got drafted in the second round by the Padres. Their signing bonus offer was a little over $1 million, but his agent, Scott Boras, at the time said, no, we want double that. And the Padres, they were not biting. So Matt Harrington ended up not signing with the Padres either. Went and played some independent ball. He had gone back into the draft the following years, and he just never came close to where he was drafted in the first round. He never got anywhere close to the money that he was being offered. You know, it's kind of, you feel bad because nowadays, he last reported was working at Costco. And, you know, man, you should have just taken the money, my friend. I hate to say it, but hey, first round, 7th pick, you know, who knows? Could have been a star, but we'll never know. At number 9, I have Stephen Drew, a member of the 2013 World Series champion Boston Red Sox. That team will always live forever in my heart. But Stephen Drew, he was a very solid shortstop for the Red Sox that year. Offensively, he was okay. He hit .253 with a .333 on base, a .443 slugging, 13 homers, 67 RBIs. I remember that postseason, he was pretty bad. But then Game 6 in the World Series, he did hit a home run, so I guess he redeemed himself a little bit. But with Stephen Drew, he was mainly good defensively. He was awesome for the Red Sox at shortstop that year. But the Red Sox, that offseason, they decided to offer him the $14.1 million qualifying offer. He ended up turning it down. Now, I can see why the Red Sox would just go ahead with the $14 million qualifying offer, because in his career, he had averaged a little under $12 million worth of value in his career. So I could see where that offer was coming from. But Stephen Drew did have a very good 2013 season when it came to value. So they were deferring a little bit. Stephen Drew thought, okay, I could probably do better out here in the open market. But in the end, teams just weren't really willing to give him a long-term deal. So in the end, ended up going back to the Red Sox, later on in the season. He missed about a month. So he ended up only getting $10 million. It was a prorated it was the prorated contract, or the prorated offer of what they had offered him previously of 14. So in the end, ended up losing right around $4 million. Stephen Drew, you should have just taken the qualifying offer, my friend. Remember Michael Conforto? We haven't heard of him for a little while. Last offseason, the Mets offered him the $18.4 million qualifying offer, ended up turning it down, ended up not getting another offer from any other teams. He was tied to draft pick compensation, and teams were a little worried with the production. If you take a look at his 2021 season, his batting average was really down. The on base was really down, even though the on base was still pretty good, but his slugging was really down. His WRC plus was down. Everything was just down with Conforto. So teams were a little hesitant to go a long-term offer with him, and in the end ended up passing up $18 million. As of right now, he hasn't played since 2021. He's definitely on the market this year. So this story is not over, but I mean, my goodness, he could have just accepted the offer this past year, could have had $18 million in his pocket, and could have just been doing what he's doing this offseason. In the end, Michael Conforto, he should have just taken the qualifying offer, $18 million. That's a lot of money, Michael Conforto. At number 7, I have Jose Bautista. Now, there wasn't really an offer made from the Blue Jays in terms of a long-term offer. I'm mainly looking at the strategy that Jose Bautista was taking in terms of what he was looking for. This dude was looking to get paid. 5 years, $150 million is what he was looking for in the offseason before the 2016 season. Now, I can understand why he was looking looking for that kind of moolah. I mean, look at the season that he had in 2015. He had a 377 on base, a 536 slugging, 40 homers, 114 RBIs. This guy was off the charts. Absolutely. And he had been off the charts for, what, 5 years at that point. So I can understand why he was looking for that kind of money. The problem is, in 2016, he was going into his 35-year-old season. I mean, teams, they don't really want to give long-term offers to these players that are, 35 and older. So I don't know. I just think this was not really the right move. I can understand you're looking for the money, but the Blue Jays, there's no way they were going to give him that kind of money. Now, maybe if he was looking for something, I don't know, maybe less years, maybe less money, maybe a little bit of both, I think he could have had himself a pretty nice contract there to finish out his career. But in the end, ended up not really making all that much. He did take a qualifying offer in 2017, had a bad 2016 season, but after that, he just really didn't make all that much money. I think in the end with Jose Bautista, I think 5 years, $150 million. Sure, I'm all about, shooting for the stars, but I think, I don't know. He was saying also, before I actually move on, he was saying that he did not want to take a hometown discount. It says here, I'm not going to sit here and bargain for a couple of dollars. He said he offered something for the Blue Jays. When they asked him for an offer, they either meet it or it is what it is. And he says he's not willing to negotiate, did not want a hometown discount because he had already taken a hometown discount in his previous contract. I don't know, Jose Bautista. I think you probably should have gone with another hometown discount. At number 6, I have Casey McGehee. Remember Casey McGehee back in 2009 having a breakout season, finishing 5th in Rookie of the Year voting, hit 301 with a 360 on base and a 499 slugging, had 16 homers, 66 RBIs as well. In 2010, though, he was setting himself up to get a pretty nice raise even during those arbitration years. He had 23 homers and 104 RBIs. So the Brewers did engage with him about a multi-year deal, but in the end, they could not come to an agreement. My guess is that McGehee and his camp were probably looking for around maybe 13, maybe 14 million per season. If you take a look on Fangraphs here at the values of his 2009 and 2010 season, that's a combined about 27 million. So divide that by 2, you're looking at around 13.5 million. So Casey McGehee and his agent, they were probably looking somewhere in that range. And the Brewers, I'm guessing, because of the contract that they gave to Corey Hart the year prior, a 3-year, $26.5 million, a little under $9 million per, they're probably looking maybe something around that, maybe as high as like maybe 10, 11 million. With the Brewers, a couple $1 million in that small market can make a big difference. So in the end, ended up not coming to terms on a deal, even though the Brewers would have liked to have had him signed up. In the end, the Brewers ended up trading him to the Pittsburgh Pirates in the 2011 offseason. But for Casey McGehee, never really got back to those numbers. My guess, the Brewers probably weren't really willing to go a little extra with the money, because if you take a look, sure, he had the 23 homers, the 104 RBIs, but the slash line had started to dip, his OPS had started to dip, so they probably saw some things where they weren't quite sure how he was going to go and hadn't really had much of a track record at that point. In the end, never got back to those numbers. His power just dipped completely in his career. Had a decent season in 2014, but 4 home runs. Sure, a good batting average, a good on base, but the slugging was really low. We'll never know. Casey McGehee, maybe he could have ended up staying with the Brewers long term, but in the end, maybe he should have just accepted the deal. At number 5, I have Tim Lincecum. Man, oh man, I loved Tim Lincecum. Big Red Sox fan, but every chance I had, I always tried to watch a Tim Lincecum start, at least check the highlights. I just loved watching him pitch. The freak, he was absolutely insane. Loved watching the guy. He gave me Pedro Martinez vibes. Like every 5th day, you just had to watch the guy. Late 2000s, the early 2010s, he was awesome, helping the Giants win a couple of World Series. But Tim Lincecum ended up turning down a big contract offer from the Giants. 5 years, $100 million, so around $20 million per season. I could understand why Tim Lincecum would turn that down. If you take a look at his values that he had from 2007 all the way to 2011, he was averaging over $30 million of value per season. I can totally understand why he would want more money. But if you take a look here at his 2011 season, his numbers did start to dip a little bit. Sure, the ERA was lower in 2011, but you saw the FIP started to get progressively a little bit higher. The xFIP started to get a little bit higher. Players were starting to hit the ball a little bit harder against Tim Lincecum in that 2011 season. So the Giants, they probably saw something to where they're like, we're not quite sure if the success is going to be sustainable with him. Now, they probably thought, okay, obviously, we'll give you $20 million per season, 5 years. You could be a mainstay in our rotation for the next 5 years. But they weren't comfortable going, big mega deal. In the end, they ended up giving him a 2-year deal to finish out the arbitration years from 2012 to 2013, and then 2014 to 15, ended up getting a pretty decent deal as well. A slight pay cut there, right around $5 million, but in those 4 years, ended up making $75 million, so ended up making up, some of the $100 million that he ended up not signing for, but in the end, he had just completely fallen apart in those later, the 2010 seasons. Went to the Angels on a 1-year deal, never even pitched for them. Went to the Rangers a couple of times, one time. But yeah, Tim Lincecum, in the end, the Giants, they made the right move with him. And in the end, probably should have just taken the $100 million, my friend. At number 4, I have Ian Desmond. Man, oh man, Ian Desmond turned down quite a lot of moolah from the Washington Nationals. But let's talk about the numbers real quick. It took him a couple of years to get going, but once he did, he was very good. 2012 was his breakout season. Hit .292 with a .335 on base, a .511 slugging, 25 homers, 73 RBIs. 2013, 2014, good seasons as well. However, the Nationals, after the 2013 season, had approached him with a contract extension, 7 years, $107 million. A little above $15 million per season, but Ian Desmond thought, nah, I think I can get a little more than that in the market. So in the end, they ended up coming to terms on a 2-year, $17.5 million deal to finish out his arbitration years. But when he went out into the open market, he did not get those, or the numbers that he was thinking in terms of dollars. Now, Ian Desmond, I can totally understand why he was looking for more money, because if you take a look at the 2012, 2013 seasons, he was putting up really good value. But when you take a look at the average from the beginning of his career up until that point, he was averaging a little under $15 million per season. So I can understand it from the Nationals' point of view as well. And if you take a look also in 2013, his numbers did dip. And then 2014, his numbers dipped again. So I can understand why the Nationals presented him with that offer. But still, over $100 million over 7 years, that's a pretty decent deal if you ask me. But Ian Desmond, in the end, was not able to get close to the contract they ended up getting offered with the Nationals. He took an $8 million deal with the Rangers, had a pretty good season that year. He did end up getting a 5-year, $70 million deal, but that AAV was lower than what he would have gotten with the Nationals, and then ended up taking a 1-year deal, or as a buyout, with the Rockies in 2021. So in the end, Ian Desmond, he definitely could have had a lot of money, and he left a lot of money on the table. At number 3, I have Nomar Garciaparra. Man, oh man, this one kind of hurts to talk about. Nomar Garciaparra, he was one of those players that got me into the Red Sox first when I was, 7, 8, 9 years old. Nomar Garciaparra, this guy was just a folk hero in Boston. I mean, my goodness, look at the years that he had, winning Rookie of the Year in 97. He hit .372 in 2000, had an OPS above 1,000 in 99 and 2000. This guy was off the charts. You had A-Rod, you had Jeter, but you had Nomar there as well. There was always that debate. Who was the best shortstop out of the trio? Unfortunately for Nomar, ran into some injuries in 2001, but he was able to pick it back up in 2002 and 2003. However, he started to have some Achilles problems in 2004, and then with the Red Sox, he was trying to come to terms on a contract extension. There was a lot of bad blood between the two. Things were being said about both sides, accusing each other of certain things. In the end, the Red Sox had offered Nomar a 4-year, $60 million deal, and that is pretty low. I mean, when you really think about it, $15 million per season. Now, contracts at that time were nowhere near the contracts that they are today. But if you take a look at Nomar's 2003 season, he was worth $25 million, and that was for a 5.8 Fangraph WAR. Again, they didn't really use so much of the advanced analytics back then as they do today. But if you look at the seasons that he was having, I mean, 6.4 Fangraph WAR there, 7.3, 6.3, 7.6. He was off the charts, but he was starting to run into some of those injuries, but 2002 and 2003 were pretty good seasons. So I can understand why Nomar was wanting a little bit more money. I would think, you know, probably at least $100 million he was probably thinking. So he saw this offer as pretty much an insult. In the end, the Red Sox made the infamous trade, sending him to the Chicago Cubs, and the Red Sox ended up going on to win the World Series in 2004, their first World Series since 1918. And as for Nomar, ended up taking, you know, a few other deals after that. Took an $8 million deal in 2005, $6 million with the Dodgers in 06, then took a 2-year deal, finished his career with the A's, but he didn't make anywhere near the $60 million that was being offered to him by the Red Sox. So in the end, I mean, I can understand where Nomar was coming from, but I could also understand where the Red Sox were coming from too. It was just a sad finish. You would have loved to have seen Nomar win a World Series with the Red Sox. He was just that good, an absolute legend in Red Sox history. At number 2, I have Neil Walker. Neil Walker was always one of those really solid players that you just like to have on your team. Was with the Pirates for a long time. Ended up going to the Mets in 2016 after the Mets had made it to the World Series in 2015. Played very solid for them as well. Again, just a pretty solid player overall. Could hit for some average, could get on base, hit for a little power, driving some runs. A pretty solid second baseman in the game at that point. Now, before the 2017 season, the Mets had offered him a 3-year, $42 million deal. Now, it's interesting reading the comments about this because Neil Walker, he was saying that the Mets had actually pulled back the offer, saying here, it's well documented that I never turned anything down or turned down anything. They can say what they want, and I'm not going to get into that. As far as a miscalculation on my part, absolutely not. Now, when we're looking at the values of Neil Walker, he was, like I said, always very solid. He averaged a little under $20 million worth of value per season. So the Mets were offering him $14 million per season. So I can see from Neil Walker's camp, they were probably looking for a little bit more than the $14 million per season. In the end, the Mets, they pulled it back. I mean, maybe Neil Walker, again, you can't blame him because at the time, probably thought he was worth a little bit more than $14 million per season. Probably thought, I don't know, maybe 17, 18 per season, he thought. But in the end, the Mets, he did not accept the deal in time. They pulled it back. And then Neil Walker ended up not really making all that much money in his career. He ended up going to the Yankees after being traded to the Brewers in 2017. Went to the Yankees on a 1-year deal, $4 million there, $2 million in 2019 with the Marlins. Went to the Phillies. In the end, he maybe should have just taken that 3-year, $42 million deal. Again, I can understand where he was coming from. You know, when you look at the numbers, he definitely had been playing more, worth more than $14 million per season. But in the end, you know, sometimes you just got to take the money. And coming in at number 1, I have Juan Gonzalez. Juan Gonzalez could have been the highest paid player in Major League Baseball history back in 2000. But before we get to that, look at the numbers here with Juan Gonzalez. This guy was absolutely off the charts. 92, 93, had back-to-back 40 homer seasons from 96 to 98, back-to-back-to-back 40 homer seasons, a couple of MVPs in there as well. This guy was off the charts, one of the best players in the 90s and the early 2000s as well. But Juan Gonzalez, he ended up getting traded to the Tigers before the 2000 season, and the Tigers had offered him the largest contract in Major League Baseball history, $140 million over 8 years. Easily would have been the highest paid player in baseball. Ended up turning it down, and in the end, Juan Gonzalez got nowhere near what he was offered there. After the 2000 season, his numbers did dip a little bit that year. Ended up going to the Indians in 2001. Had a pretty decent year that year. Actually ended up going back to the Texas Rangers, 2 years, $24 million. But after that, he just really didn't get anything after that point. The fact that this guy had $140 million on the table, and granted, I get it. Hey, this guy was putting up just monster numbers. He thought, all right, I can probably get a little bit more than this on the open market. But man, when you're getting offered the highest contract in history, I don't know, man. I think you got to take it. But hey, what can you do? We'll never know. But Juan Gonzalez, the Tigers definitely, they avoided that because he ended up, again, just really spiraling in his career. Couple decent seasons there in the end. But in the end, Juan Gonzalez could have been the highest paid player in Major League Baseball history, but in the end, he should have just taken the money. So that's my list. Tell me what you think down below. Did we leave anyone off the list? But that's all I have for right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.